You're listening to this week's episode of the Vacation Rental Business in Today's World podcast. You're about to start transforming your business and life with the information found here. We interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in the vacation short-term rental industry and supporting businesses. The information found here is a combination of brain science, transformational thinking, safety and loss prevention, and vacation short-term rental knowledge and experiences, all rolled into one to help you and your business to achieve levels you never thought possible. I am glad you are here, and now please welcome your host, Eric Thibodeau.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Safer VRs. I'm Eric Thibodeau, your host. I'm glad you're here this week. This week, I'm in Gulf Shores in Orange Beach, Alabama, with the spring break activities here in current tides in our property management business. So, been here working this week and we definitely have a busy week. Had a really busy week last week and the weekend with our typical spring break activities and issues we deal with. But it's been good. So, looking forward to this week. But on the podcast this week, we're continuing with our 5 principles that we're looking at. And we've already been through the first 2. And just as a recap on the first 2 principles was people make mistakes, which we covered 2 weeks ago, and then blame fixes nothing, which is what we discussed last week. And this week, we're going to launch into the 3rd principle, and it may be the most important one that we're going to deal with. And once again, this is also pretty simple. As I was going through this and I was rereading the information material, I found that really it's the simple things we struggle with, particularly in all aspects of life. When we have events or when we have failures, basically there's 2 things that happen for us. One is we can learn and improve, or we can blame and punish. And so last week we learned, or so far we've learned, that basically mistakes happen. And then we also have discussed and said, well, we can blame people and punish them, which is what we did last week, and which is what we covered last week. We didn't do that last week. I hope not. I'm sure we did out there somewhere. But this week, we're going to really get into the real heart of the matter of what we need to do. And it's called learning and improving is vital. So this is principle number 3. Learning and improving is vital. Once again, this is work that was put together by Todd Conklin, who's been working in human performance, and he's really shifted this into how we work in a safety environment, or how we implement this from safety. Remember, we talked about this, something we call think differently or safety differently. And, working in safety for 30 years and just the last maybe 2 years, begin to review some of this material. It's really, I can see it pretty profoundly in how we work and how we need to improve how we've been working. So learning and improving is vital. And we talked about the 2 choices organizations have: learn and improve, which is what we prefer to happen. It's the most powerful. It's also maybe the one that takes the longest amount of time. And it always doesn't produce immediate results for us. However, blame and punish, does. In our conscious minds, we like to see immediate gratification or immediate action. And sometimes that's not really what we need. So when we're looking at safety and loss prevention, we're looking at how we want to have controls present. And when we look at controls present, we are looking at things in the now. And we're going to talk more about that as we progress here. However, we tend to look at things when we blame and punish, and when we look at particular events or failures, they become really clear when we look back and look at how things progress, or when we see with the person who made the mistake or the group of individuals who made a mistake, we can suddenly see what they couldn't see, right? Because we have hindsight with us. We have things there in front of us. And so we begin to blame and punish. So really, learning is a deliberate improvement strategy that we're going to look to embrace And I look at it from an incident review standpoint. And I don't say investigate, I really talk about review, and we'll cover some more of that. But it's all about how we want to learn and get better. If I was to ask you in your business, would you like to improve and get better at safety, loss prevention, revenue management, anything we could pick, housekeeping, laundry? Would you like to learn and get better? Yes, I think everybody would say, I'd like to learn and get better. However, when we begin to look at what we actually do, we find fault. And just this week, I was talking to the team. We were having some issues with housekeeping. And I said, I'm not looking at the housekeepers for these issues, right? We created the process. Something's wrong with the process for how we manage housekeeping and cleans and hiring. And so 100% responsible 100% of the time. Let's go learn what didn't work. Let's talk to the team and see what happened instead of us talking about what we think happened. And that's what we're doing now. It's pretty powerful when you embrace that. However, I tell you, I have to catch myself. I'm pushing there, right? Because it takes time for us to implement change in how we're working. It does take time. So if we look at how we've been operating, right, because we're moving to a different place, we typically have some type of incident review or investigation, and then we look at corrective actions from that were looked at from an analysis of the events and issues, and then a method that reacts to what happened in the past. So we typically take a look back at what should have happened, and then we typically blame and punish there. So what we want to do is learn from our mistakes and the mistakes of others. That's reactive after the fact, but important for continuous improvement, right? Remember, we're humans, we make mistakes. So it's inevitable, we will have them. So we've talked about, hey, we want to be learning, we want to be a learning organization. And I say that tongue in cheek, right? Because we don't always want to, we say that we want to do it. But let's say here we have identified the principle that learning and improving is vital. So in short, learning may be the most powerful safety and loss prevention tool you have. I read that a few times and got to thinking about it, and it absolutely is. I mean, we know we have mistakes. We know there's going to be problems, right? And we work to put controls in place. However, those controls may not work. One is we have to identify the controls in the present and the now and implement them. And so learning takes effort, deliberate resourcing, and courage to go out there and do it. We have to make an effort to do it. We have to take deliberate opportunities to resource it, to understand. And then it takes courage for us to go out there and do it, because we talked about what our bias has been is to blame and punish, provide some type of immediate action that may or may not provide the controls we need. So sometimes when we start to now look at how we learn, it may be contraindicative of what we're used to, right? We say, well, managers know and managers tell us these things, but managers, me included, I see work differently from the workers do. I'm not doing the work there. So we see things differently than others. And we really want to learn from the workers who actually conduct the work. They're the ones who really know the struggles and the issues that are out there. So you really don't fully realize what's out there, the difficulties that the workers are encountering, unless you use systems and processes while doing the work, and you speak to them about how the work is progressing and how are the controls working and what could be done better. Because when you think about it, right, let's say you had a stick, and on one end of the stick, it was really sharp and pointed. We'll call it the sharp end. And then on the other side of the stick is really just a rounded type end. We'll call it the blunt end, right? And workers are always at the sharp end of your organization. They're closest to how the work is done. They're closest to how things are encountered. And managers and leaders, we're typically at the blunt end, furthest away from the work, the least involved with the work. We may be dealing with some regulations or customers, but really the workers are up front. Frontline supervisors, frontline managers are there. And then particularly even the regulators. If we wanted to go back, the regulators are even further back, probably the closest in to the blood in. So when you look about that and you think about that when you're working, it helps you think about moving and how we're learning. And those at the sharp end are the most able to help us resolve and learn. And those at the blunt end, like regulators, maybe customers, guests, company managers, they're the least likely, not saying that they couldn't, but they're not involved with the work every day. So now we know the real power of how we're going to learn is we're going to involve the sharp end of our organization, that being the workers. And we typically, I look back at my work, we don't typically do that. We typically say, well, we may go out there and look at some work. We may talk to some people, but then we'll sit in a conference room and we'll put together a procedure or process that may not actually work or may not actually control the hazards for the guests or the owners, and then we implement it, right? So in this new learning process, we're going to change things up. And I want you to become comfortable with the idea of using the words learning and improving, right? We tie the two words together. When we do that, people who use two words together consistently and purposefully, it's called co-usage. And when we co-use these words, it really adds power, right? So learning is the analysis and improvement is the action. Learning is the analysis. So I'm learning, I'm talking to my frontline workers, I'm understanding, and then the improvement, right? We're talking about learning and improving is the action. So I can learn a whole lot. I could talk to frontline workers, I could talk to managers or regulators, I could talk a lot, learn a lot, but if I don't improve through action, right? And the action typically comes from the workers, right? Because they know what's working and not working. You then have to take a look at and do both. So we can't just learn. We certainly know we like to be in action, so we want to do that. So your leadership teams out there must learn and improve deliberately. So now if we take that, learning is basically the analysis, the improvement is the action, and now we're going to do that deliberately, right? Deliberately is what we're doing out there. We're doing it with intention, with power to be better than we were before. And most importantly, it's causing us to begin to be proactive and rather than reactive, which is how we've typically involved or dealt with events or failures. So why do I say it's good we want to learn and improve deliberately? So organizations really don't learn by accident. That's a statement that's been out there, and it's really not true, right? When accidents occur, we create a reactive response. We don't necessarily look at what was taking place. We typically look at who failed, not what worked. And good organizations learn deliberately. They learn and improve in a proactive way. So our challenge, particularly in safety here, has been that we have traditionally seen and measured success by tracking the absence of negative occurrences like accidents and injuries. And I have to tell you, when I started reading this part, I had to stop because it's really so much different. And I kind of realized some of this, when we look at every other business, we look at production, we look at what we produce, when we look at revenue and cash flow, we always look at what we are producing most of the time in a positive way. However, when we look at safety, we measure negative outcomes. You were injured. We had a fire. We had a drowning. What do we have? I mean, why are we measuring ourselves through negative occurrences, right? How can we possibly ever improve, right? How can we improve? What we really need to be looking at is we attempt to manage bad outcomes. So when something bad occurs, we often spend a huge amount of time and resources and efforts trying to learn and determine how the organization failed to prevent what was taking place. That's not really learning. It's trying to confirm biases that we already have. That's why we go back a lot. I go back a lot and say, accident is not about the prevention of events or failures. Accident is not about measuring these things. What we're working to do is looking for the presence of controls. Controls are always present. We can measure it. If I'm going to prevent a fire, what am I going to do? I'm going to look at removing the fuel, the heat, right? I'm certainly not going to worry about the oxygen, right? We need a fire. We need enough oxygen, a fuel that will be burned, and enough heat to generate it. And if you get really sophisticated, you say, once that all starts, we have this uninhibited chain reaction that occurs. So that's what a fire is, right? And so I want to prevent it. So what do? I focus on the controls, right? I remove the heat source. I remove the fuel. And so I can measure that. And I can also see how successful we are. But if I just look at the negative occurrences and say, well, we had a fire, well, what did I learn? I really want us to focus on and learn about what controls are in place and how are we doing to make sure that those stay there and there are strong barriers to prevent incidents. And if we can't prevent an incident, then we want to fail to a safer state, as we talked about before. So the enemy of learning is knowing. And you've heard me say, I'll say again, there's awareness, understanding, and knowing. And awareness is I become aware of a situation, like I became aware of learning is important. Learning is vital. Learning and improvement is deliberate. I'm aware of that now. You're aware of it. Now we can begin to understand that process. And that's what we're doing now. We're starting to understand how learning and improvement deliberately is the direction we want to go. And we want to measure positive outcomes. When we say, well, I know that, I would say many of you don't know it, right? I know it. However, I still work to begin to understand in a different way. And the difference between those, I won't go into those today, but really knowing is at that deep inner core level of who you are, that you know that intuitively. And once again, if we're talking about safety and loss prevention in the vacation rental industry, knowing is not a place we want to be, because many of us don't have it at the core level of who we are in our identity. And I'm not saying that to be mean or hateful, but it's the truth, right? Many of us are just becoming aware of safety and loss prevention, and others are understanding it. And now I'm introducing some different ways of learning and improving, because it's really important in how we function. So when we talk about knowing is the enemy, right? If you think you know the answer, you will not ask an important, relevant question, right? So if we know, it doesn't matter if we know, right? It's the people involved. Do they understand? And do they really know? I'd say they probably don't know. So I'm probably going into this a little more deeper than I have in some of the others, but I feel it's really important there's the whole piece about learning. As we learn, then we can improve and we can reassess our controls. So what we really want to look at in safety, and this is something we just don't talk about, right? Safety, we want to manage safety as a capacity, is a very different way to look at your organization's ability to perform stable and safe work. What does that mean? So capacity is just like, how much weight can you lift? Can you lift 100 pounds? Can you lift 120 pounds, right? Well, if the capacity of your organization is 120 pounds, let's say, you're trying to lift 140, it won't work, right? You've exceeded your capacity. So I want you to think of capacity in that way. However, think of it as also like a circle, maybe, or a cylinder that you've filled up. Once you fill the cylinder or the circle, you can't get any more in. So what you need to understand is that can I get a better circle? Can I add more weight? Possibly in the future, right? But that means you have to spend more resources. Look at what your organization is capable of in the capacity. And that's typically involving people. So what's the capacity of your organization to learn? When you previously would have asked, hey, who failed? Because safety as an outcome to be managed. So if I'm looking at who failed, I'm looking at outcomes to be managed. However, when we start to ask the question, what failed, we begin to look at what's our capacity to be monitored. So am I outcome driven or am I capacity driven? And I begin to look at what failed because I want to understand what worked, what failed, and how can I improve it? How can we learn? When you see this, you will find knowing this bias is redefining success changes when you seek it. So like I said, this is getting a little bit more challenging here, but the amount of capacity you have to manage operational risk, the more successful you will be. So how do you manage your capacity? And capacity could be measured in how many procedures do I have? How much training hours do I need? Those are all things that add resources, right? Consider your capacity is what do I want people to do? And when something goes wrong, I have the ability to, I have controls in place. So I'm really wanting people to understand what are the controls in place to manage these, let's call them high energy type things. They are, how do I manage the prevention of a fire? How do I manage a drowning in a hot tub or in a swimming pool? How do I manage fall hazards? How do I manage slip hazards? How do I manage trip hazards? And I work that into how I want to use or implement those controls. So when we continue to learn and grow, we like to measure things, right? It's human nature. We like to measure. And so I want you to think about your progress in your metrics that you're choosing as a vector. You're using something that's a metric in motion. It's not something that's like stuck in time, which is like a fixed metric. A fixed metric gives you an assessment of that snapshot in time. It's like, well, how many fires did you have this week or this year? How many incidents did you have? How many injuries do you have? How many near misses? You have this little snapshot of something, right? And when you do that, you don't really, it causes difficulty in how you're learning, right? Because as an organization, we're always moving, right? When we stop, we die. So if you use a vectoring type metric, it gives you a better understanding of the direction your organization is moving. So if I'm switching my thinking from I'm measuring events like failures, instead I'm now measuring, which we'll talk about that again, I'm now monitoring those particular what's working, right? I'm looking at my controls, and those are always progressing and moving forward as we learn. So as we continue to learn and grow, we take a look, improvement is data input problem, not an output problem. So as you continue to learn and improve, you have more information, more data where you can particularly look at what do I need to control? What are the things that I'm looking to control to prevent or reduce the likelihood of a particular incident, right? In order to create leverage for more time for short-term gratification actions that fix problems, right? So as safety, as looking at safety professionals or how we like to fix problems, you probably heard me say that. I see, someone working out there and they don't have fall protection and they're at a height. I stop them and I give them fall protection. I fix the problem. However, did I really stop and look and say, I really want to understand why aren't you wearing fall protection? And then now I begin to open up this whole new dynamic about, hey, I'm beginning to learn. This individual is going to tell me why they were not wearing fall protection. Because I could stop them, I could have them do it, I could blame them, I could punish, but now I'm going to say, let's stop and talk about this, right? I'm gathering data because I don't necessarily just want to fix the problem. And when you start to work with me, you see, we have self-verification checks. I don't look at a point of an issue. I look at the health of the system. What is the health of your system? Because those systems typically have controls that now basically this is what we want, the controls. We want the presence of controls to keep us safe, right? So we've not really been good at identifying some of these problems in our organization because we've been looking more at the individual correcting the problem. It's kind of like, if you stop and think about it, everything that happens, something arises that gets you angry, that causes an incident, whatever, that's the outcome of what happened. But there's something else beneath that that says, hey, maybe there's no controls present here. Or if I'm thinking about why am I angry about a situation, the anger is the outcome. There's something else that's there. So don't focus on the outcome, focus on what's happening, the context of the situation. So we want to become better at learning in our organization and not just accessing or profound knowledge of workers. And I know sometimes we talk and don't really want to engage workers, but they have all the answers. They may not be what we're looking for, but certainly they deal with the issues every day. So working with them, talking to them about what's going on is really important. So I'll begin to wrap up here. And I feel like this podcast is kind of jumbled up here as I'm bouncing around and you're listening and saying, what the heck? But let's just work on, I'll wrap up here. These last 2 points are pretty powerful. And when we typically look at, because we talk about blame, in traditional view of how we work on situations, workers were the problem to be fixed. Therefore, our learning, as I'm doing quotations, focused on finding the circumstances where the worker could be fixed. Instead, workers are not the problem to be fixed. Workers are the problem solvers. So the workers are doing work and they're encountering some issues. Let's talk to them, stop and say, let's talk about what's happening here. Why can't you, what's working, what's not working? Why is it that you can't do this safely? What's the situation? I think that's really important because the questions you ask influence the answers you get. I think that's really important. I'm going to just go one more place here. Okay, I said I was going to one more place, but I'm going to two. So when we want to learn and to gather information, right? It's necessary to learn. Investigations are really powerful, and they're typically used to look at a bad thing that was not prevented by the organization. So what if we did learning differently? What if we didn't always look at how the organization ended up here? And we get back to this whole part about blame. What if we said we'll use investigations to look backwards and the desired ability to change history? That's what we typically do, but we want our learning to go forward. So we certainly carry knowledge about what happened in the past. However, what's occurring at the moment, remember we talked about this in level 3, all incidents, all events happen in the moment, the now. And so what controls do we have in place to solve that? And that's why investigations are really important to consider. And I'll leave with this. Now it's really one thing. As we continue to learn and we look at our organization and we say, well, hey, things are going really well. And I'll say, why do you think things are going well? And say, well, we haven't had any accidents. We haven't had any events, right? So does the presence of something not being there that you haven't measured, can't tell me why, how does that equate to something good? What we can say is we want to measure what is the presence of the controls, what are the physical things there? And why are we not better at understanding things that keep it successful, right? And here's this really probably the best statement I've read or heard in quite a while. What is happening when nothing bad is happening? What is happening when nothing bad is happening? That's just an amazing question for this particular topic about learning. Learning and improving is vital. And I'll end with that and just say, what are we doing here to learn? Because we want learning to be intentional. We want to learn. It's vital. We want it to be deliberate. Learning and improvement deliberately is our target. So I'll stop there. So I feel like I'm starting to ramble a little bit, maybe a lot, you're saying. I got it. But I believe and I feel that learning and how we've done learning in the past isn't always going to work. We want to stop measuring negative events, start learning what is working, what are the presence of controls, and just ask yourself, what's happening when nothing bad is happening? And how does that make you feel? Makes me feel nervous. Makes me feel like I'm not really running my organization. If I took that same question and applied it to every other part of my business, I would have an answer with finances and operations and maintenance and housekeeping and laundry and everything else, business development, new owners. I have an answer. Somehow when we start to look at safety, we don't have an answer. And I feel that's because we work and historically looked at managing negative outcomes, negative events. And sometimes when nothing happens, we feel like we're doing okay. So if you ran the rest of your business, my business that way, how would that make you feel? Definitely something for us to consider and learn. I hope this was valuable. This is probably the toughest one to cover, and I apologize maybe for some of the rambling. However, I'd love to hear from you, know how this is working, or maybe how it's not working. Everything doesn't always have to work. Be good to hear from you. You can catch me in safervrs.com, in our Facebook group, or just reach out and touch me on LinkedIn there. That'd be great. So go out and create a safe day. Have a good spring break if you're out there, still enjoying it, and serving our owners and guests and creating safe stays. That's what we're looking for. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Safer VR's podcast with Eric Thibodeau. If you enjoy this, I would love you to join my Facebook group, The Safer Vacation Rentals, for more of the same. You can also join our email list at www.safervrs.com.